Today is a joyous day, for at last the king has called back his loyal companions and knights errant. You enter the grand hall at Camelot to trumpets and fanfare which greet you, your cousins and brothers in arms. For a year and a day each of you has sought comfort or honor in their own way. Some have rescued maidens, slain dragons, and visited foreign lands. Others have married, defended their own castles, or made humble homes and families. But for a year and a day, however content or thrilled you may be with life outside court, each of you has yearned to reconvene, to once again kneel at the feet of your king, raise glasses to each other's health, and break bread around the glorious round table. As the wide, heavy doors swing open and you behold the spectacle of the king's hall, a rush of emotion overcomes you. The table, huge and round, is set for 70 or more, and a colossal urn at its center overflows with native wildflowers and greenery, foxgloves, poppies, and meadowsweet among them. The hall is decked with ivy, which spills from the mantels, windows, and hangings, giving you the impression of having entered a living indoor forest. The fragrance of sweet breads, roasted meats, and ripe fruit excite your senses. But no food or drink or florals or spectacle are as exhilarating to you as the faces of your companions. With a full heart, you embrace your dear friend Gawain, who claps you on the back. You clasp hands with a glowing Lancelot, who remarks how much you've grown in the year since your parting. You share such moments with many of your friends and cousins before making your way to the seat of highest honor, where King Arthur beams at this gathering of his knights. He is just as warm, yet commanding as you remember, and you feel a surge of loyalty and admiration as you kneel before him, addressing him as your grace. But Arthur lifts you to your feet, and with tears in his eyes, touches your cheek and welcomes you into a strong embrace. The hall is filled with such emotional reunions, and the gasps of delight and cries of joy echo and bounce across the stone walls. Finally, the king, his cheerful voice booming over the cacophony, bids you all to take your seats. Every seat is filled, save one at the left hand of Arthur. For as long as you can remember, this seat has remained vacant, though for the life of you, you can't understand why. Perhaps it awaits a knight worthy of sitting so close to the king. Your mind wanders briefly as you muse on what noble deed might earn you the honor of taking the seat. When all are seated comfortably, Arthur raises both hands into the air in a gesture of welcoming. He's called you here, he says, to celebrate and reflect on all of your accomplishments over the last year. This day will kick off 7 days of games, hunts, tournaments, and feasting before you are all free to return to your homes and adventures. Soon a magnificent feast is brought before you, It takes several people to hoist the majestic roast boar into the hall. Quickly, the table is laden with splendid pies and puddings, and your goblets are filled to the brim. You can't remember having a feast so scrumptious in your entire life. The hall rings with laughter and the clink of glasses. Before long, bellies full and eyes glazing over, a contented quiet falls over the hall. Platters and dishes are whisked away, and candles and torches are lit to counter the waning dusk outside the windows. The king commands the attention of the brood once more. As he speaks, your eyes follow a mysterious man, cloaked in forest green robes, who hovers at the perimeter of the hall. The man's hood falls just enough to remove the shadow from his brow, and you recognize him as Merlin, the great sorcerer and advisor to Arthur. He's always had an air of mystery about him, but his deep, kind eyes betray a gentle heart and a well of compassion for all who gather at the king's table. Indeed, you can hardly remember an occasion or gathering so infused with love and tender friendship. You turn your attention back to Arthur, who asks for the happiest tidings of the year past. Anyone with glad news or joy to share should come forward. A bearded man across the table from you stands, clears his throat, and shares the news of the birth of his first son. He blushes and smiles as the guests erupt into a chorus of cheers. Others stand one by one and describe tournament victories in Les Britain, or encounters with pirates, or other quests and achievements. Each is met with applause and acclaim, and the king looks mightily pleased. As the nights grow weary and few look willing to stand and speak, Arthur gestures to his right-hand man, Sir Lancelot, to share his recent victories. Lancelot, humble to a fault, is reluctant to stand, despite several of his friends pleading to hear his tales of honor and chivalry. Then you hear a gasp from the far side of the table, and a whisper of awe sweeps through the voices around you. You look first to the king, whose eyes are shining, looking up toward the center of the room. Turning to see what he sees and gazing upward, you behold nothing less than a miracle. Hovering a few meters above the center of the round table is a golden, glimmering orb of alarming size. It shines like the sun, dazzling and almost impossible to look upon. And yet, you cannot bring yourself to turn away. Every person in the hall has their gaze fixed upon it, you sense, with the same transfixed wonder. The longer you stare, the more the dense core of light at the orb's center begins to soften at the edges, as though there's something more to behold if you can only look beyond it. You try your best to make it out, nebulous as the object may be. There are smooth curves, a basin or a bowl perhaps. It's impossible to see where the object ends and the luminescence of it begins. But in the uncertainty, a swell of resolve blooms in your heart. You feel called toward it, moved to act, as though this vision represents your chance at last to take the seat at the side of the king you admire so much. And then in an instant, the specter vanishes, leaving the hall in awe-struck silence. The knights glance furtively at their friends and neighbors as though each of you wonders if anyone else beheld the same vision. Then the king addresses the mystified crowd, his voice full of reverence and amazement. It's clear to him that you have all gathered for a reason, though not as he had hoped, for a week of tournaments and games. Rather, you were all brought together by a higher power to receive a significant charge. Those of you who are willing and able must, the king says, depart at first light to seek the Grail. The hall bursts into conversation as each knight describes to his tablemates the shape and size of the Grail in their vision. Some claim to have heard a voice or music. Others swear the Grail was borne by an angel. Some describe the Grail as a jewel-encrusted goblet made of pure gold. Some say it appeared as a simple, rough-hewn cup. To some, a flat serving dish. To others, a cauldron overflowing with food and drink. One knight even claims it was a glimmering stone with emerald hue. It seems no knight can agree on what they saw. A general air of excitement hangs over the gathering as the knights fantasize about the glory of achieving such a noble quest. Gawain leans toward you and mutters that the two of you should set out together, and you agree. You've always made a good team after all. But then he insists you take off tonight, in his words, to head off Lancelot. It's a fine idea. Minutes ago, before the golden vision, you would have welcomed the rush of sleep, but now you feel the urge to follow your quest as soon as possible. When the fervor finally dies down and the moon rises high outside the castle walls, King Arthur bids you all good night and departs for his bedchamber. Sleeping arrangements have been made throughout the castle for the knights visiting from far-off kingdoms, many of whom will curl up with blankets in this very room. But you and Gawain, taking advantage of the hustle and bustle of the changeover of the great hall to a shared bedchamber for 100, slip out quietly into the moonlight and make for the stables. Gawain is disarmingly affectionate toward his horse, Gringolet. He's a courteous knight, of course, and a great admirer of ladies, but as he coos and strokes the horse's neck, you have the distinct impression that no woman holds Gawain's heart the way Gringolet does. You both mount your horses, and with a glance back at the castle, stately and silhouetted against a moonlit sky, you depart to seek the Grail. You ride through the night, over hill and dale, and Gawain regales you with stories of the maidens he's rescued and beasts he's pursued. He's a wonderful storyteller, and you've looked up to him since you were a child. Now you long to earn such a story of bravery and nobility. You return to the unspoken hope that this might be your chance. The countryside is quiet, save for the hum of insects and the occasional tremulous call of a tawny owl. You've ridden east, more on a hunch than anything, and just as dawn's rosy fingers arise on the horizon, you come upon a dense forest. It stretches out as far as the eye can see before you, with no apparent route around it. "Into the woods, then," says Gawain, a mischievous smile on his lips, and he kicks at Gringolet's sides. You spur your horse to follow. As you enter the wood, your jaw drops at the towering majesty of the trees, which extend into the heavens. You welcome the scent of pine and spruce, which invigorate your senses. The morning light is just beginning to cascade through the canopy, golden and sweet. But as your eyes adjust, all you see is sparkling green. Gawain rides a few paces ahead, Gringolet expertly navigating around a gathering of beech trees in the absence of a clear path. Little birds above you respond to the burgeoning dawn with trills of song and activity. The forest, you think, must be ancient by the size of the trees and the density of the vegetation. You imagine the wonders this place must have seen. If the trees could speak, what tales they'd tell of wandering knights and lost damsels. Archaic secrets must have seeped into the root systems, only revealed in the tree's rings, once cut down by an unlucky wood-gatherer. You and Gawain weave in and out of the thickets of trees in search of a coherent path for what might be hours, mostly in meditative silence. You feel secure under the cover of the forest, as though you've wandered into the circle of a powerful protection charm, something of Merlin's old magic. As you travel deeper into the heart of the wood, you almost recognize patterns, repetitions of clusters of trees, or too perfect placements of foxgloves or other wildflowers. It's as if the whole forest was perfectly designed by an unseen hand. You imagine a beautiful fairy queen from one of your mother's bedtime stories, floating through the forest on gossamer wings, arranging the flowers and branches and mushrooms in sacred organic symmetry. You're brought out of this fantasy by a flash of white that streaks through the trees before you. By the sudden alertness of his body language, you know that Gawain has seen it too. "The White Hart," he says aloud. "I never thought we'd meet again." In the instant before Gawain takes off, you dimly recall the tales of the White Hart you heard at your last visit to Arthur's court. Years ago, before you were made a knight of the Round Table, Gawain, Lancelot, Kay, and many of Arthur's most accomplished companions competed to capture a mysterious, pure white stag. Despite their most valiant efforts, the hart eluded them all leading Arthur and his knights to believe the beast had supernatural gifts. Many times, you've heard Gawain wax elegiac over his failed quest to capture the creature. So it's no surprise that in the next instant, Gawain is gone, spurring Gringolet to make haste after the hart and leaving you in the dust. You urge your horse to follow suit, and he darts through the trees after your companion. Following several minutes of chase, your horse navigating narrow pathways and you dodging branches overhead, the vegetation thins and you slow your horse to a walk. Squinting through the trees for a sign of your old friend and listening keenly for the snap of twigs or the rustle of leaves, you conclude that you are now on your own. But the thought somehow is not at all disquieting. The forest feels kind, if a bit mischievous, like an old friend or guardian. An amusing thought crosses your mind that perhaps the white hart was sent to tempt Gawain, playing off his competitive nature and unwillingness to accept defeat. You wonder how many other knights have now set off from Camelot, scattered to the four directions in the hunt for the Grail. Some may yet be headed for this very wood. As you continue to ride, yawning from having traveled all night, you find comfort in the gentle sway of the saddle. Catching sight of blue iridescence in a tree ahead, you are charmed to see a kingfisher perched upon a heavy branch. Its wings and brow are a brilliant blue, its chest a buffy reddish brown, and its bill is so long it looks as though it might topple forward at any moment. You pull back on your horse's reins to slow him down. The bird sits with noble stillness, and you take great effort to avoid spooking it into fleeing. It reminds you of childhood, a mated pair of kingfishers nested near your family home, raising their young and delighting you with their antics. You wonder if the appearance of this stately bird is a good omen for you, or if, like Gawain, it intends to tempt you from your quest. Just as you draw close enough to see the kingfisher's shining black eyes, your horse utters a grunt that startles it. With a high, whistling call and a shimmer of lustrous blue, the bird takes wing. Your heart flutters, but you're left with gratitude for the fleeting vision of beauty and comfort the kingfisher brought you. Beyond the bird's abandoned branch, you now see lies a glittering forest glade. A hazy morning light picks up a greenish hue and plays patterns upon the grass and a carpet of bluebells. Emerging from the thick wood into the clearing, you notice a subtle change in the air. The rich scent of soil and earth wanes surely, but there's also something of a charge in the atmosphere, something invigorating and intangible. As you scan the glade for a direction to follow, or even a hint at where Gawain might have got to, your eyes meet those of a white hart. Your breath catches. He's a majestic creature with an almost otherworldly opalescence. It's not hard to understand why your companion was so drawn to him. You too feel a smoldering desire to capture the beast, as though his very existence stimulates intense craving. But something holds you back from going after him, and it seems that the heart feels unthreatened by your presence. After holding your gaze for a length of time impossible to estimate, he bows his head and returns to grazing idly on the grass. Then he moves on, ambling languidly across the clearing. You nudge at your horse's sides to follow at a safe distance, though you're not entirely sure why. It's just a feeling, an instinct that the heart leads the way to something miraculous. But the path will only clear for the pure of heart. You follow the stag into a far opening into deeper wood, and for the first time, a recognizable path extends out before you. The hart stops to graze on mushrooms or leaves every few minutes, and you hold your careful distance. At each pause, he looks back at you for just a moment, then continues on his way. It's as though an understanding is forming between you, along with a quiet respect. At this deliberate pace, you surrender to the navigation of the heart, letting the reins fall and giving in to your horse's soporific sway and the intoxicating scent of nightcap flowers. If it weren't for the tiny seed in your mind that yearns to see what lies at the end of the white hart's path, you might climb down from your horse's back and lie down among the bluebells and the curling roots of the trees. You ride for what seems like hours until the stag, who stops once more to look back at you, darts suddenly into a thicket of trees. Once he's gone, you blink silently for a few moments, stunned by his rapid departure, and left wondering if he'd ever been there at all. Was the white hart only a mirage of your weary, wandering mind? But in his absence, as you look through the parting trees, which bend toward each other across the path like an impeccable archway, you swear you can see the silvery glitter of water ahead. You bow to ride under the tangled arch of branches, and emerge from the forest to behold an expansive, coruscating lake. The sun, which indeed hangs at a late afternoon lull, catches and flashes against the placid surface. As your eyes drink in the sight and search for where the lake ends, you see that at the far side, a rocky cliff grows into the rocketing spires of a castle. It's enormous and austere, built of white stone that blends with the craggy landscape below. Then, with curiosity, you realize that the trees surrounding the lake are not full and green and lush like the forest behind you, but bare and fruitless, as if they are frozen in the dead of winter. Finally, you focus on a dark spot at the center of the massive lake, which you recognize as a small boat. A solitary figure sits in the stern of the boat, hunched and holding a fishing rod. The surface of the lake reflects so much silver and white from the rocks and the castle that tower around its edges that the silhouette of the man in the boat looks almost black against the water. Perceiving a small motion from within the boat, you realize that the fisherman has seen you from afar, and he soon pushes the oars to cut a path toward you. You begin to make out the man's features as he rows the small boat closer to the shore. He's of an indistinct age. He's older than Arthur, surely, but his features seem to shift from youthful to ancient with the changing light of passing clouds. When he nears you, his face breaks into a warm smile, and deep, affable wrinkles crack at the corners of his eyes. You feel calm and welcome in his presence. When the boat steadies on the shore, he reaches an arm toward you, but does not stand. He apologizes for the informality and asks that you excuse him from standing, as he's recovering from an injury. He can see, after all, by your arms and bearing, that you are a knight of Arthur, the High King. The fisherman asks you to join him in the boat, so he might deliver you to the castle for a good meal and a warm place to rest from your journey. The king would never turn away one of Arthur's knights. He remarks that you must have traveled all night and day from Camelot, so you must be desperate for food and respite. He is right, and your sheer desire for sleep is enough to overcome any hesitation. The fisherman assures you that if you ask at the castle, one of the king's men will ride round to attend to your horse and bring him to the stables. Tying your horse to a tree and giving him a reassuring pat, you climb into the boat, which, though small in size, is roomy enough for two to sit comfortably. The fisherman rows intentionally across the lake, and the boat rocks gently back and forth. On the way, you ask about the bare trees that grow upon the cliffs, leafless even in May. The fisherman tells you that many years ago, so many he's lost count, the king of this country was blighted with a curse. That night, the kingdom was transformed into a wasteland, barren and unable to bear fruit. For many moons, the king has waited here for one of Arthur's knights to break bread at his table and teach him to heal the land. By the time the fisherman's tale is complete, the boat reaches the distant shore. He wishes you a pleasant stay and points the way to the path to the castle. It's a steep uphill climb, and by the time you reach the top, you're ready to collapse from exhaustion. You spare a look down at the lake, which sparkles in the afternoon sun. From here, you can see where the stark, barren white trees of the waste kingdom meet the flowering fullness of the forest. There is magic afoot. Somewhere beyond the lake, among the green glades, your friend Gawain must still be hunting his elusive heart, or else he's fallen into the arms of the fairy queen. You'll meet again soon, you're sure. You pass through the gates into the White Castle, which, though considerably less opulent than Arthur's, is fine and regal in its own way. An attendant relieves you of your belongings and shows you to the main hall, which is smaller than the one at Camelot, but bedecked with tapestries and lit with flickering candles. A fire roars in the grand fireplace, before which a long, narrow table serves as the centerpiece. You ask if there's someone who can attend to your horse, a chestnut tied at the far shore of the lake, and the attendant whistles for one of his associates to meet your request. You're shown to a seat of honor at the table, and the attendant tells you that you will be dining with the king. No sooner is this spoken than 3 huddled people emerge from the archway past the fireplace. You are astonished when the light falls upon the face of the king, who's supported by 2 young men, one hoisting below each arm and helping him into the hall. It's none other than the fisherman whose boat you just left. Now, in the gleam of the firelight, with a simple crown atop his head, he looks grand and dignified. You leap out of your seat to kneel and show deference to the lord of the castle, but he motions for you to sit and be comfortable. You are, after all, a knight of King Arthur's, to whom he is also loyal. The Fisher King, whose name is Brawn, takes his seat across the table from you with the assistance of his men. A modest but delicious meal is brought before you, all the ingredients imported from nearby kingdoms, as Bron explains, since nothing grows within the borders of his. As you eat and drink your fill, the warmth of the fire making your gaze swim, you and King Bron talk of many things. Of the splendor of Arthur's court, the legends that surround his advisor Merlin, the mysteries that lie in the lands beyond Britain. Then the king asks about you, your history, and knightly ambitions. You admit you haven't as many stories as your fellows, like Sirs Lancelot and Gawain. And now you hesitate, for though you feel an innate comfort and trust in the king, you are unsure of whether to impart the nature of your quest. A questioning silence falls over the room. Both you and the king have finished eating, and you feel the drowsiness wash over your mind and body. In the still, a youth enters from the archway, carrying a shining lance, grasping it by the shaft. He passes slowly by the fire, and your gaze follows. A looming shadow cast upon the flagstone floor grows in size, then shrinks and rejoins the youth as he passes out of the hall. You watch him go, then turn your eyes back to King Bron, who gazes fixedly at you, not with surprise at what you just witnessed, but with a studied seriousness. You open your mouth to ask about the boy with the lance, but you decide against it. There's something tangled in the mystery behind the king's eyes that gives you pause. Then two other youths enter, carrying candelabras of fine gold inlaid with enamel. In each candelabra, at least 10 candles burn. And behind the youths, a young woman enters from the darkness of the archway. She carries a grail. When she enters the room, the grail she holds gives off such intense effulgence that the candles lose their brilliance, just as the stars do when the sun or moon rises. The Grail is fashioned of fine gold and all kinds of precious stones, among the richest and most prized from land and sea adorn it. The Grail passes before the fire with this solemn procession, its sumptuous jewels glinting in the fire's warm glow, and disappears, along with the candles and the quivering shadows, into the next room. A flood of questions surged through your mind, slowed and swirled by a swell of stupor and sleepiness. You feel you've seen a glimpse of all manner of mysteries this day, from the knowing eyes of the white hart to the curse of the Fisher King, now the apparition and dissolution of the Grail. You want to ask where the procession was headed. You want to ask whom the Grail serves. What are its secrets? But in the roaring glow of the fire, your mind and muscles weary, you ask no questions at all. The corses are cleared away, and the king's attendants come to carry him to his chambers. He bids you good night, and you think you can see a glint in his eye, one of distant, unquenchable hope, perhaps. You're shown to your rooms in the west wing of the castle. A narrow window looks out over the lake, which ripples in the breeze and picks up the hues of the azure gloaming. The trees of the green forest sway with the same breeze, as though the canopy itself is a rippling surface of water. How far away is Camelot, you wonder? How are your friends faring on their quests? And is the Grail truly here within the halls of the Fisher King's castle with you? Tomorrow, you think, you'll ask the questions. You'll find the answers. Tomorrow, you feel as though you could sleep for days. Just before turning toward the bed, you catch a flash of striking iridescent blue which streaks across the mirrored lake. It's followed by a high-pitched, whistling call. You smile sleepily. A kingfisher is a good omen. You climb between the heavy wool blankets and sigh deeply, releasing the strain of the hours on horseback. It takes only a moment to quiet your mind and succumb to sleep. In your dreams, a white hart leaps through the trees, pursued by the galloping gringlet. A kind man fishes endlessly on a silver lake, and a golden grail makes its glittering procession through the infinite halls of the castle of sleep. The bow of the little boat carves a path through the shallow water. It's just clear enough to see minnows darting in and out of view, their scales briefly catching the light like a flash. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and gaze ahead. It strikes you as odd that the water should be so clear when the air is so thick with mist it's impossible to see your destination. But the old boatman steers with a confidence you find reassuring. Though there's a chill in the early morning air, you're warm beneath the heavy cloak, and the gentle sway of the boat brings you a sense of peace you hadn't realized you were missing. The mist surrounds you on all sides, obscuring the shore you departed from. The boatman assured you that it's a short journey across the water to reach the fabled Isle of Avalon. But on days like today, it requires a skilled navigator who's made the journey before, lest you lose your way in the fog. As you relax into the soft bob of the water, you reflect on the stories you've heard of the island. A picture begins to form in your mind of sloping hills covered with lush grass and greenery, and of apple blossoms flowering on the trees. You imagine structures, too, made of stone and hung with glorious tapestries depicting the legendary deeds of King Arthur and his knights. The name Avalon means Isle of Apples. Its reputation in legends and lore is of association with magic and mysticism. Some say it was here that Arthur's magical sword, Excalibur, was first forged, and the scabbard woven with charms and enchantments to prevent the wearer from being wounded in battle. In other stories, the island was a place of distinctly feminine magic, beloved by Arthur's half-sister, the sometimes villainous, always powerful Morgan Le Fay. It's best remembered, however, as the final resting place of Arthur, who, after falling in battle with Mordred, was ferried there by Morgan to rest and heal his wounds. Legend has it that Arthur did not in fact die, but was healed by the enchantresses, and that he rests in Avalon to this day, awaiting the hour of his country's greatest need, at which time he'll rise again to come to its aid. For many years, you've felt a quiet ache for Avalon, a place that only exists in the pages of centuries-old texts or in the minds of dreamers like you. It was only recently that you dared to imagine it might be a real place, when you discovered a cryptic map drawn in the margins of an old book handed down by the generations of your family. The map led you to discover the secluded home of the old boatman who now steers through the shimmering mists. Lost in thoughts of myths and legends, soothed by the subtle motion of the water, you realize your eyelids have closed on their own. You open them, expecting once again to see nothing but mist, but instead, your destination lies ahead, emerging from the thick air like the sun from parting heavy clouds. Your first impression is of overwhelming green. But as your eyes adjust, they begin to take in more detail, like the pebbly shore just ahead, the ivory dotting of apple blossoms upon the trees. You scan upward, for the green extends high into the morning sky. More than a gentle slope, you behold an enormous hill growing from the base of the island. It's lined by trees, which grow sparser toward the crest. And at the apex, you can make out a tall stone structure. You feel a wave of curiosity and awe as the boat approaches the beach. How could a sight such as this remain hidden from the world, you wonder? What mystical curtain have you passed through to arrive at this obscured shore? As you climb out of the boat, you thank the kind boatman, pulling a few silver coins from the leather pouch inside your cloak. He is humbled and grateful for the offering. He wishes you a pleasant visit to the island and indicates a bronze bell that hangs from a wooden post near where the boat has docked. When you're ready to depart, he says, just ring the bell and he'll return to ferry you back across the water to the mainland. You watch as he and the boat disappear once more into the clouds of mist, and you allow the sense of peaceful solitude to at last sink in. Inhaling the scents of apple blossom and calendula, and taking in the songs of wrens and skylarks, you venture forth toward the heart of the island. A dense forest surrounds the base of the hill, and you see an opening in the trees. Once you enter the opening, you feel like you have entered another world. The way the diffuse sunlight of the morning peeks through openings in the canopy, pouring toward the ground like spun gold, the feel of the soft soil beneath your feet, and the way a path seems to magically materialize before you as you move forward, all seem to contribute to a sense of otherworldly mystery. Before long, you notice some movement at your periphery. Turning your head to see what's making the movement, you see nothing but trees. You continue walking through the forest, but you notice the movement again, and this time see a flash of rusty red and white as you turn your head. Holding still so as not to make a sound, you focus on the spot where the flash of color disappeared. After a few moments, a furry, pointed face peers out from behind a thick tree trunk. The beautiful red fox emerges, moving slowly and with care until it stands in the open path behind you. You and the fox look into each other's eyes, and any sense of fear of humans the animal may have felt falls away. You feel a distinct kinship with the creature. You continue walking through the forest, but now you hear the gentle footfalls of the fox behind you at a safe distance. You are comforted to have a friendly companion on your journey through an unfamiliar place. The woods grow thicker as the path slopes upward, and the density of the canopy allows less and less light to reach you. But just as the path dims, a little glowing light appears just ahead. Then another, and another. Before your eyes, the trees are lit up with will-o'-the-wisps, guiding you along the path. You glance at the fox, who playfully runs after one of the shimmering orbs, which flits away like a little bird. Before long, the path grows even steeper, but the forest and vegetation thins. Looking upward, through gaps in the trees, you can glimpse the structure at the top of the hill. You must be more than halfway to the zenith. Emerging from the wood, you're grateful for the softness of the morning's light. You look behind you to see if the fox is still there, but it's standing just at the edge of the forest, gazing after you. Instinctively, you understand that the fox is a creature of the wood and will remain there until you make your way back. You nod, thankful for the company, and the fox darts away back into the thickness of trees. You're not entirely alone, however, for a few of the will-o'-the-wisps have floated past you from out of the wood. You take a moment to marvel at their bluish-white bioluminescence. The few that float on do not carve a straight line to the top of the hill, but travel buoyantly to your left, though your head wants to continue upward toward the tower. Your heart's curiosity must be satisfied. So you follow the wisps, knowing you have as much time on the island as you like. They lead you along a winding path spotted with primroses and toadstools. You step over a clear, babbling brook which flows downward toward the ring of forest. You begin to wonder if the wisps intend to confuse you and get you lost in this strange place until you see where they are leading you. Before you, as if rising from the ground, is a majestic circle of standing stones. Approaching the stone circle, you become acutely aware of the droplets of dew that hang, suspended in the still air, refracting the sun's light and muffling the distant sounds of birdsong. Rays of light bounce from stone to stone, creating the impression of spiders' webs or delicate strings, turning the circle into a marvelous harp, playing the music of the spheres. The air within the circle seems to hum with vibrations. Each of the stones is carved with mysterious ancient symbols and runes. Some you feel you've seen before, and others are entirely new to you. You feel that this must be a sacred place where ancient magic was practiced and remains in the bones of the earth to this day. You take a deep inhalation and close your eyes, imagining white, warm magic running through your body, then spilling outward from your fingertips like light. Opening your eyes and placing a hand on the tallest of the stones, you feel a subtle warmth building in your palm and fingertips and wonder, is the heat coming from the stone or from the magic within you? It takes an enormous effort to pull yourself away from the sensations of strength and magic you feel within the circle of standing stones. But your inner curiosity compels you upward once more toward the tower at the top of the hill. Leaving the will-o'-the-wisps behind you to float back into the trees, you ascend. The muscles of your legs are growing tired, but you push on. When you finally reach the summit, you pause to look back at how far you've come. You can see the rolling mists that cascade over the water and the island's pebbled shores. But in the distance, beyond the mist, you can also see the mainland. By now it must be bustling with busy people going about their busy days. You might have been one of them had you not chosen this day to follow your heart's curiosity for reflection and adventure. You thank yourself for centering your own needs. Turning now to the stone structure that overlooks the magical Isle of Avalon, you marvel at its size and stature. From afar, it seemed almost toy-like and abstract, but up close, it strikes you with sublime awe. Elegant tracery adorns the archway entrance, which seems to beckon you inside. You climb the few stone steps to the heavy wooden door and push it open. Making your way into the entrance hall, you are amazed to see torches lining the walls that light themselves at your presence, providing warmth and light for your exploration. This truly is a place of magic. You sense that no one else is here, and you feel safe and held inside these walls. Much as you imagined, the halls are lined with magnificent tapestries. Though they must be centuries old, the gold and crimson threads look new in the flickering torchlight. You stop to look closely at one, which seems to depict many of the adventures of King Arthur. On the left side of the weaving, you can make out a turreted castle approached by men on horseback. The leader, Arthur himself, is armed in gold shining plate and wears an elaborate jeweled golden crown. Reading the image from left to right, your eyes fall upon two individuals, a man and woman, who stand close together before a fountain. The man holds a sword, and the woman is lavishly dressed. These must be the lovers Lancelot and Guinevere. The background of the tapestry is woven with a rich indigo, and peppered with deep red roses and acanthus. The next tapestry you stop to admire portrays the last days of Arthur's life in Avalon. The king reposes on a bed at the center, surrounded by women, some playing harps, some praying, and some administering healing herbs. The woman who sits cradling Arthur's head must, you imagine, be Morgan herself. Outside the king's chamber, another woman waits to blow a horn. Not so vividly colored as the first tapestry, yet imbued with such naturalistic perspective and authentic emotion, you find that it's moved you to tears. There's a familiarity in the eyes and features of the women, too. You feel as though you've seen these faces before. A peculiar sensation of déjà vu prickles at the nape of your neck. As you stroll past the edge of the hanging, you come upon a doorway. Curiosity moves you through it, and torches spring to life to illuminate the chamber. With delight, you recognize it as a library. The shelves which stretch from the floors to the high, vaulted ceilings of the chamber are lined with thick, leather-bound tomes. You run your hand across the spines of a shelf at shoulder level. Some appear to be books of fairy tales, and others resemble grimoires. Much of the lettering on the books is too old to read, but you're astonished by the absence of dust on the books or shelves. It's as though the space has repelled any signs of age or abandonment. You gaze upward at the towering stacks, and one book with a forest green binding and gold foil lettering stands out to you. But it's much too high to reach. Feeling a sudden impulse, you reach your hand upward. It's as if your movement is guided by an unseen force. You feel the same sensation of warmth and light that you felt in the stone circle, tingling from your shoulder to your fingertips. The power coursing through you is so undeniable that you're almost unsurprised to see the forest green book budge from its place. It slides out from between its neighbors and floats gingerly down into your outstretched hand like a leaf falling from a tree. You run your fingers across the textured cover and read the embossed lettering of the title, recognizing it as a collection of Celtic legends, one that a dear caretaker read to you when you were a child. You carry the book to the heart of the library, where a piece of furniture resembling a chaise lounge sits before a stone fireplace. Holding your hand out again toward the fireplace, you feel warmth build in your fingers once more, magically kindling the logs into a crackling fire. Your muscles, aching from the morning's climb, long for the comfort of rest. So you curl up in the lounge pulling a thick wool blanket over your legs. You open the Book of Legends and begin to read by the light of the fire. Inside the front cover, you are unsurprised to discover a handwritten inscription, your own name. The stories flood back to you as you take them in, and they nourish and comfort you as they once did in childhood. Before long, lulled by the flicker of the flame, you feel your eyelids become heavy and begin to droop. You think of the rolling mists around the island and feel a wave of tranquility and safety, knowing that Avalon is yours alone, that this is a homecoming. Your fingertips tingle with traces of the magic you now possess, and perhaps that you always did. I deserve meaningful rest, you think, as you allow your eyes to close and surrender to a swell of drowsiness. The fire magically dims, glowing just enough to keep you warm and cozy. On the shores of the island, a bell waits to be rung when you're ready to return to the world. But for now, you sleep in the heart of Avalon, the realm of ancient magic, surrounded by forests and mist. Your eyes drink full of the vibrant green hue, so lively against the white winter snow. One last look at the green chapel before you depart, the deep emerald of it, the overgrown ivy that marks its threshold. Such a strange name for a place like this, a chapel. More like a rending in the earth, a gap of stone and tree roots that form a natural chamber, all moss-covered and dappled with vines and leaves. A recess that somehow staves off the winter cold, the kiss of snow and ice, so green it's like eternal spring. The place makes you think of those practitioners of the old religions, those druids who held their worship in no structure made by man, but only under open skies and in ancient forests, in the sacred spaces of nature's creation. Perhaps that explains this year you've had and all these strange encounters. Perhaps you've had a brush with something of the old world, the ancient wild magic once thought lost. As you turn your eyes from the chapel a final time, letting your gaze fall upon the purity of untouched white snow, you blink hard against its brilliance, yet a haze of green still seems to creep, uninvited at the corners of your eyes. Will it ever go, you wonder? Or will you always sense its presence, the creeping green like slowly gathering moss. You wonder if it will be more nuisance or comfort. You tighten a small satchel through the loops of the saddle upon Gringolet, your beloved horse. If only he could speak, you think. What a conversation you'd have on the ride back to Camelot. What marvelous laughter and puzzled merriment you'd share as you look upon all that's happened to you this year. And now, adjusting the green girdle round your waist, your touch lingering on the texture of gold thread woven into it. With a heaving groan, you hoist yourself atop the saddle, and you gently kick his sides. And he's off, disturbing with his hooves the immaculate snow. Could it all have been a dream, you find yourself thinking, as Gringolet marches through the drifts? Every turn and twist of this winding journey seems so. The way remarkable things come to occur with such little ceremony, and the way details, faces, objects, fancies from the waking life become untangled and repositioned in the dream world. In whatever country you have walked this past year, be it the world of dreams, the realm of man, or the fairy country, you never thought you'd see such wonders and such wildness cross your gaze. It began at Christmastide, when King Arthur lay at his court in Camelot, a great feast and celebration. All his knights, 70, returned from their scattered quests and wanderings, from their castles and families, from the forests of adventure. All was jubilant and jovial, with great greenery hung about his halls, tables laden with ripe oranges and apples, puddings and pies. Never let it be said, you think, that the good King Arthur did not know how to host fine festivities. But all the dazzling decorations, the delicacies, even the torches and the candles in their brightness, could not compete with the glow of the king's magnanimity. He shone like the brightest of stars at his elegant seat, next to his fair Queen Guinevere, lovelier than ever. You wonder briefly if your memory and the ordeal that followed has added a rosy tint to the scene in your mind. Can it really have been so bright, so cheerful, so peerless? Perhaps most clear in your recollection and most cherished among all your memories is the fondness with which King Arthur looked upon you, his kin, as he welcomed you to your seat at the round table. The tenderness with which he kissed your cheeks and said your name. Maybe this reverence with which he greeted you played a part in your actions to come. You only know for sure that you were seized by the desire to prove yourself, to live up to the admiration in the king's face, to become the knight he already believed you were. And oh, the feast was divine. The food was rich and succulent. The mead flowed plentiful in your goblets. All the guests sat sated and sleepy, slumped back in their seats, you at the right hand of the king. Full and happy, you surveyed the faces about the table, the round table, at which no one, not even the king, sat higher than any other. There was Sir Lancelot, glowing and handsome, even if somewhat forlorn, And there was Sir Kay, a lovable grump and foster brother to the king. And dear Sir Percival sat by, hardly more than a boy, but brave and willing, full of that innocent longing for adventure. It is among the greatest pleasures of a night, you think, to rest in good company. Surely the tournaments, the battles, the adventuring, these are all the deeds that the bards will sing of one day. These are the things for which you'll be remembered. But they do not make a night. No, what makes a night, you think, is fellowship, the strong bond between kin and companion, forged in fighting and at the feast table, the feeling of warm and hearty welcome, stories and humor shared between friends. That is the reward. You'd trade all the glory in the world for it. At least, you would now. But on that Christmas day, though you basked in the warmth and contentment of your company, glory and honor were still at the forefront of your mind. How single-minded you were then. And when at last the feast was done, bellies were full and eyes glazing over, the king addressed his many companions with a Yuletide toast and a curious plea. On Christmas Day, he said, he should not leave this table till he heard some tale of great adventure, or witnessed some marvel or miracle. You can remember the smirks and the murmurs and whispers round the table. Your eyes and many others fell upon Sir Lancelot, who always had great adventures to tell of. But he did not so much as open his mouth to speak. So, in the absence of a knightly volunteer, someone to impress the king with a song of peril or jubilation, as if on cue, there came a great groan and creaking at the door to the hall. The door swung open, heavy and thundering, and all eyes were fast upon it. You wondered if it was some knight of Arthur's who'd ridden day and night to join the feast and sadly missed it. Pellinore, perhaps, whose face you do not see today. Maybe he comes at last to brag at the slaying of the dragon in his kingdom. But no, it was not a familiar face that the light of the lanterns fell slowly upon. There was silence around the table, a cavernous silence against which the sound of hooves upon the flagstone floor beat all the sharper. And into the light he rode, monstrous large and imposing, so huge and hulking he might have been a giant. And he sat upon a horse sturdy enough to hold his height and girth. Bushy was his beard and hair, and broad was his neck. With each step the horse took into the hall, each hoofbeat came the sound of shaking bells, though from where they rang you could not see. And he was, though you could not believe your eyes, head to toe, ink green. Green was his hue, top to bottom, his hair and beard, his face and neck. He was green as grass, as overgrowth. Green were his garments too, his boots and tunic richly green. He had neither helm nor hauberk, nor armor girding his awesome stature, no shield upon his arm. In one hand he held a sprig of holly, and so looked like one attending to the festivities. But at his waist he had a weapon, indeed a prodigious one. An axe of such size and length befits half a giant. It too was green, and also gold, brightly burnished steel that seemed to soak up the flickering light of the lamps all about. Its handle finely carved and wound with iron, engraved with symbols indecipherable, and green. Even now, as you recall the moment of his arrival, you feel a shiver penetrate the warmth of your garments. You spur on Gringolet through the thinning snow, whether to hasten toward Camelot or hasten away from the green chapel, you do not know. The wood lies ahead, now no more a mystery as it was on the journey hence, but a comforting place where the thick vegetation and dense canopy will provide cover from the cold wind. Upon the Green Knight's entry to the king's hall, Arthur himself was obliged to stand and welcome the uninvited guest. Never before had the king appeared small to you. Rather, he was always a monumental figure. But now, the Green Knight towered over him. Even the greatest king was only a mortal, facing whatever he would, God or devil. Even now, you do not know. But the Green Knight laughed and spurned the king's welcome, held in contempt his courtesy, chided you all for children playing at knighthood and chivalry. Such an insult to the king and to the round table, this greatest fellowship of knights ever assembled, could not be tolerated. You felt the heat rising in your cheeks, your blood run hot. But the Green Knight's laughter persisted, booming and flagrant in the echoing chamber. A Christmas game, he proposed as he dismounted. Still he stood head and shoulders over any knight, without the additional height from his horse. He wrested his axe from his hip. In his strong hands it looked light as a feather, though the steel was thick. With the weapon in one hand and the holly in the other, he smiled, the apples of his cheeks blushing green instead of rosy. By this holly branch, he explained, you all must know I come in peace to pass the hour. He went on to say that far and wide word spread of the chivalry of this court, of the games and tourneys held here. He thought there might be among you a worthy opponent. But now he sees that only children tarry here, and none befit to face him. Unless someone round this table, king or knight or cupbearer, should participate in a Christmas game. Stroke for stroke is what he proposed, the axe gleaming green in his hand, blow for blow. If anyone be warrior enough to face him and deal the first blow, the Green Knight would give as a gift the glorious weapon. Then, with a respite of 12 months and 1 day, the winning warrior must agree to receive a blow in return. Such a curious proposition, and though the axe was covetable indeed, it seemed hardly a task worth volunteering for. Silence again hung like a mist over the feasting hall, the Green Knight's grin splitting wider by the moment. Then, in a moment of impulse, feeling fierce loyalty and desperate desire to avenge the insult to your king and kinsman, before a logical thought could calm your rushing mind, you sprang from your seat. Begging leave of Arthur, to take the task in defense of his grace and the honor of his court. You leapt lightly to it, and knowing in your heart it was folly, you fought all the more heartily to claim the privilege. You were so foolish then, and so prideful. How humbly and falsely you proclaimed to the king that your life would be the least loss at the table, should you fall before the Green Knight. How thickly you lay on the self-criticism. How much, though you did not admit it to yourself then, you imagined Lancelot would envy you as the king's champion. With some reluctance, but ultimately resigned, the king blessed your blade and bade you give the Green Knight a blow. An agreement was struck between the man in green and yourself that after you deal your blow today, you should seek him out 1 year and 1 day hence. Then he knelt and bowed his head and held out his axe to you. The green steel caught the lantern light and glimmered, a gleam in your eye. You took the axe, which had a pleasant heft in your hands, a substantial weapon, solid and strong. It seemed you grew in size and stature holding it, became more capacious, more poised. The Green Knight bared the flesh of his neck and bid you make your attempt. Gladly, you gripped the axe and gathered it up high, then lay the blade down sharply, dealing your end of the bargain. The steel was so sharp that it met no resistance, and in an instant, your spoils lay upon the floor, silent and evergreen. How can it be that what happened next was no dream? Such things are the domain of fairy stories. Now, atop Gringolet, the wintry sun cascading through the forest canopy like sheets of gold on white, you touch your own neck, feeling the supple flesh there. Even now, you feel relief and release a sigh. But on that Christmas day, the Green Knight, cloven in two though he was, reached nonetheless for his head and stood once more before the round table. Still, he was taller than you by far, taller even than the king. You might not have believed your eyes but for the gasps of 150 knights, all aghast and marveling at the sight. And under his arm, the Green Knight's head was cheerful as ever, laughing still. The good Queen Guinevere looked likely to swoon, and soon Sir Lancelot was at her side, her ladies too, to catch her fall. Presently, the Green Man chuckled gaily and gave you again your instructions. This time he gave you the name of the place where you should seek him 1 year hence. The Green Chapel was all he said, and with his laughter booming he climbed again atop his horse and rode forth from the hall as if it were only a nick on the neck he'd suffered, leaving you all stunned and silent at the king's Christmas table. You pass now by a glade through which you came first before this morning's dawn. How different it looks now, with midday sun above it, thawing the snow beneath which branches creak and crackle. How bright and new it seems. You carried with you all the year the Green Knight's axe and his promise. You trudged through deep midwinter, cold and quaking. In your dreams you saw the knight and heard his laughter and knew he'd greet you at year's end. But when spring came, you fought in tourneys, spirits lifted, and looked on your encounter as a distant memory, a Christmas myth to be told again at Yuletide when the king requests a marvel. At times, with the fields of flower and friends about, he even slipped from your mind, the night all clad in green, until again, seeing how green were the groves, he'd cross your thoughts and you'd grasp the axe. At Pentecost, the king called for his knights, as every year, to renew their oaths of chivalry. At this great gathering, it was upon the axe blade, not your sword, that you were sworn anew, and on the swearing, to the virtues of friendship, generosity, purity, courtesy, and piety, you thought again of the Green Knight and your bargain. But summer was long, and the days were long, and you had many adventures with your companions. Soft winds sprinkled seeds across the fields and forests, and rarely then did you think of him, or of the hastening harvest on your heels, for the summer lingered so languidly. Then came the time of reaping, when the scythe and sickle struck the stalks, and then you clung to the axe at your side, for the time of your reaping would soon be upon you. How swiftly then the year yielded, and leaves from lindens loosely fell, the frost forthwith. All the grass that was once green was now gray, all that was ripe now rotted. The axe weighed heavy at your side and your oath upon your heart. At last, when winter nipped at your fingers, you begged the king, your lord, for leave to seek the Green Knight and receive your blow. You would not swerve from your strange destiny. Mournfully, the king granted your request and summoned all the best of his knights to counsel you. On the morn, you were made ready. In the finest garments they dressed you, with soft linen and knots of gold thread, in shining mail, hauberk and helm, a silken sash and rich gold spurs. They brought you your shield, upon it the pentangle painted in pure gold. The five-pointed, five-sided star gleamed bright on your arm, symbolic of your virtue. You chuckle to think of it now, of the 5 virtues of chivalry, of your 5 faultless senses, 5 wits, and 5 fingers. How fair you looked with the shield and the axe and your armor aglow. Gringolet, too, splendid with a saddle fringed with gold, a steed fit for the greatest of knights, which, you had no doubt on that solemn day was you. The shield is at your side no more, nor the axe. You set forth from the court of Camelot before the first snow fell, though it came quickly behind you. You kept no company but Gringolet, and rode far northward through the woods of North Wales into the mountainous Midlands. In every village to which you came and at every hermit's door on which you knocked, you asked about the knight in green. None could tell you a tale of such a man, save for folk tales and fairy stories, though they often offered you food and hospitality. Quivering cold settled soon about the country, but on you rode, even as icicles clung to the sides of your helm. Through your difficult journey, as all went white and gray around you, still the leaves of holly and fir were green, greener than ever, and all the more brilliant for the contrast with the snow. Into that same forest you ventured, the one through which Gringolet now bears you, and it struck you as a most wonderfully wild wood. The hazel and hawthorn were all twined together and covered with moss, the trees tangled and mired. You soldiered on, praying for a path, or to stumble unto some hermit's hearth, where you might be shielded from the night's cold. Then, as if the prayer of your heart had fallen upon some eager ear, through the briar and brambles you beheld a light, aloft upon a hill, shining in the night's cold and darkness. You wondered if it was a mirage, a trick played upon you in this state, but there, though you blinked, it remained. A castle, not so elegant or extravagant as Camelot, but most welcome to your weary gaze. Gringolet's step even was springier as you directed him toward its light, hoping the hosts had some hospitality to spare. Now you pass beneath the castle again in the light of day, where not hours ago you slept fitfully, where for 3 days and nights you feasted in the company of its lord and lady. In the wintry daylight, it seems to quietly smirk from its hilltop, wily and coquettish. Nothing in the world would bring you back through its doors now, you think, spurring Gringolet on, away from its shadow. In that castle you were offered food and drink and lodging for as long as you needed. You were pleased to accept, but Christmas was drawing near again, and on St. Stephen's Day you were expected at the Green Chapel, you explained. At this, the Lord laughed, his laughter booming to the high ceilings of his hall. Why, the Green Chapel was not half a day's ride from the gate. He knew the Green Knight of whom you spoke, so here you'd stay in the comfort of your private chambers, and you'd be welcomed by all the guests of the castle who longed to hear tales of adventure in the elegant speech of a knight of the Round Table. Indeed, your name was well known in this region already, and you were lauded as chief among Arthur's knights, the most virtuous and most gallant. It was in that castle that you struck another bargain, this one with its jovial lord, knowing not how tangled the threads of your promises would soon become. But this bargain seemed so simple to uphold. While each day of your stay the Lord would go to the hunt, you would remain here within the walls, enjoying the warmth and comfort of his hospitality. At the end of each day, the Lord promised to present to you as a gift the spoils of his hunt, and at the end of each day, in return, you would present to the Lord any gifts you received while within the castle. Of what gifts he might speak you could not conceive. So you shook on the bargain, bemused as ever, while the web spun about you unseen. The spinner, though you did not know it so then, sat silent beside the lady, an old woman, nameless, who looked upon you with curiosity and care. You held up the bargain, and so did the Lord, still with pleasure and laughter as he laid his quarry before you each evening. And you presented your winnings too, though holding your tongue as to where each was won. On the first day, a kiss you exchanged for a deer. On the second, 2 kisses for a boar. And on the third day you gave 3 kisses to the Lord, but you withheld your true winning. For while the Lord was on the hunt, his lady had come to your chamber and offered you something more precious than gold. A ring first, bright as the sun with a crimson gem set in it. This, though tempting, you refused. But then she offered you a girdle of green as the night you would come to face if your memory served, all embroidered with shining gold thread and soft as the finest silk. A remarkable thing, but all the more wondrous for the power it held. For the lady said, "Whomsoever wears this sash of green wears a charm of protection to keep them safe from worldly harm." That this might fall into your lap on the very eve of your encounter struck you as most miraculous. And although the Lord's bargain gnawed at your thoughts, you accepted the lady's gift and tied the sash tight around your waist, concealing it beneath your tunic. The lady bid you swear to keep the girdle secret, and you kept your word that night at the exchange of winnings. To say it did not tear at you, this secret betrayal, would be a lie. But on that day you weighed your life against your honor and made a choice. 3 kisses to the Lord in exchange for a fox, and the Christmas feast commenced in good humor. When Christmas Day had come and gone, and the red crest of sunrise slipped over the horizon, you donned your charmed green girdle, your shield, and the glorious axe, mounted Gringolet, and rode to meet your strange destiny. Your pace was slow, but determined, and you held high your head. The sash seemed to keep you warm, though it also set your thoughts to stir. It was only a short ride to the place described by the lord of yonder castle, where dwelt, he claimed, the knight in green. And as it came into your sight, you had no question that you had found the green chapel indeed. It was not a chapel in the style with which you were familiar, nor would you have called it such had you come upon it unknowing. It was more like a great fault in the earth, as if the Green Knight, large as a titan, had brought his axe down heavily upon the ground, and from the rending in the earth had poured luscious greenery in untamed spirals. You steeled yourself to slip between the rocks into the natural opening where lay the dealer of your destined blow. And he was there, of course, green as ever and yet not so brilliant as before. For now, in his chapel, he seemed to blend with the natural tones of the grass and moss and vines about him. It was as if he himself were a growth, which having one day set himself to it, had pulled up his roots from this very ground and become a man. There was laughter in his eyes, just as there was fear in yours. But the green girdle warmed you still, steadied your beating heart. The shield on your arm and the axe in your hand, you bowed your head and presented the weapon to its master. You'd come at last on the destined day to complete the Christmas game. Even now, as you emerge from the wood, you wince to remember it. You tenderly touch your neck once more, as if to ensure it's still there. It is. Oh, without a doubt it is. For the Green Knight missed his blow. After all this time, though you did not but flinch. It's only hours ago, and yet the details seem to slip away, again making you question whether all of this was only a dream. But still the sash adorns your waist. The Green Knight's laughter echoes still within the chamber of your memory, the persistent and familiar laughter. How could it have taken you so long to notice? How could you have failed to hear the ringing echo of the night in the laughter of the lord of the castle? The curious coincidence of the Lord's knowledge of the chapel, or the predilection they shared for games and tricks at Christmas time. The Green Knight dropped his axe and laughed, and in so doing, his green hue reddened and his face ruddied till his cheeks were shining like ripe red apples. His hair went brown as the hair of a boar, and his stature was suddenly not so imposing. An artful disguise, the Lord admitted, laughing still, spun up by none other than Morgan le Fay, King Arthur's half-sister. The Green Knight was no devil, no ancient druid's god, but a man like any other. And he'd be glad to bring you back to his castle, raise a cup to you and drink to your honor. She was there, after all, Queen Morgan, in the guise of an old woman, and she'd be curious to know the outcome of her play. It was all a game, you deduced, a test, rather, a wicked game, a web in which you were spun unknowing and stitched into an impossible knot. Then the Lord gestured to the slip of green silk that slid from beneath your tunic. Though you concealed it and dishonored the terms of your latest bargain, he forgave you. After all, You only valued your life, and what man could think less of you for that? Dazed and daunted, you politely refused the offer of return to the Lord's castle. The thought of showing your face there after such an encounter and facing the woman who designed your strange destiny was unappealing, even thinking of the warmth of the Lord's fire. You thought only of Camelot, leaving your shield and the axe in the green chapel, where the Lord's ceaseless laughter pealed like Christmas bells. You dashed off to start toward home. Around your waist, the green girdle is bound still and will be bound henceforth. You set yourself steadfastly to it. After such an ordeal and such a failure of your renowned chivalry and courtesy, you'll wear it as a mark of your disgrace. You've tied it outside your tunic, over your shirt of mail, so it might be seen in its dazzling green hue by all. The ride to Camelot takes several days, but it passes lighter and swifter than before. For though your heart is heavy with humility, and the winter's chill sets deep into your bones, the end of the journey is home. You've left the chapel of the Green Knight in one piece, and you are grateful for each glimpse of green holly on the boughs, and even for shivering birds on bare branches. It's a return you never thought you'd make, and you bless the goodness and beauty of the natural world for guiding you forth. You seek shelter each night in the homes of humble folk, weary of the games and tricks in noble houses. At each you're welcomed and praised for your renowned virtue, and to each you tell the story of your strange encounter with the Green Knight, your honor besmirched, and your mark of shame in the green girdle. But your pleas of ignominy fall unheard by the glowing admirers that surround you. At last, when you and Gringolet are most in need of it, the sight of Camelot crests over the horizon. Already you can taste the flowing mead and fresh bread that await you in the king's hall. You wonder if word yet has reached the court of your survival, or if your return upon the new year will be a complete surprise. You ride into the castle gates and find lodging and food for your hungry horse in the stables. You stroke Gringolet's mane and neck. What a good friend he's been to you throughout your ordeal. How grateful you are that you'll see more adventures together. Then through the heavy oaken doors, in the company of the king's guard, you pass into the familiar halls of the castle. Never before has it seemed so welcoming, so warm, and so cherished as it does now. You thought you'd never see these halls again, and you treasure every inch, from the gray polished stone to the cavernous ceilings. And now, to the feasting hall you go, where already you can hear the sound of a joyous gathering. So they haven't all departed yet, your companions, you think. Some have stayed to ring in the new year alongside their king and queen, or perhaps to remember you in solemn mourning. The guard swings open the doors, and for a flash, you feel taller than yourself, greater in stature and swelling with pride. You feel supernaturally strong, a thing of powerful magic. But as the hall erupts in cheers and shouts of welcome, and as the faces of your friends come into focus before you, you diminish once more to your own size and state. 100 hands are clasping yours, your name on the lips of the greatest knights at court. Lancelot is beaming with pride as he congratulates you. And there is Percival. Oh, heartily you embrace him, so much more a man than he was at your last parting. The king and queen are there, and in Arthur's eye you see such sparkling admiration that you can hardly bear it. Indeed, you can hardly bear any of it, for none of them will hear your plea that it is no honor to return unscathed. None of them will accept the green girdle as a symbol of your failure. Instead, each and every one pledges to adopt the girdle as the newest fashion in honor of your great quest and well-matched victory over the Green Knight. You can no more protest their praise, and so, after courses and courses of fine, rich delicacies, you retire to the guest chamber made for you. Tenderly, you untie the green sash round your waist, and you feel a great exhale rush forth when you've removed its constraints. It really is a work of wondrous craft. You wonder whether in fact there is a charm woven into it, or if you merely believed it so out of longing and hope. Did Morgan, the king's own half-sister and well-known sorceress, sew it with spells the way she made Arthur's scabbard? That gift, too, protects its wearer from harm, even more so than the sword it sheathes. The silk slips across your fingers, and the threads sparkle in the light of the dying fire. You hang it by the hearth, admiring it still, even if it reminds you of all you failed to do. You can admire it. On the morrow, it will be a new year, a new start. All the perils and marvels of this year may pass away into memory or myth. You'll tell this tale again at the king's Christmas table, to be sure. You'll try not to change the details too much, to make yourself seem braver, nobler, bolder. It is a pity, you think, to close out a year feeling as though you're a step back from where you started. But perhaps that's all right. Perhaps it's in the nature of things to crest and fall, to win and lose, to struggle and to triumph. You might not mark the years or yourself so sharply if that were the case. You might look upon yourself as you look upon your friends, and they upon you, with recognition, support, and indulgence. There will be time to contemplate it all. For now, you are thankful to have found respite in Camelot, among friends and cherished kinsfolk. A garland of greenery hangs above the modest fireplace, brought in from the outside, pulled down from the trees that never lose their hue, as a reminder of the promise of new life, new growth. Was it really only some trick, some cruel test you've endured? Or have you had a brush with that old magic, the realm of fairy and folktale? You think of that green chapel far away, that even in bleak midwinter snow flushes full with green, erupting in the magnificence of life. You can see him there now, the knight with his axe, a figment, an illusion, a trick. No, not to you. You'll sleep tonight in gratitude for your life and your breath and your companions. You'll wake tomorrow in the light of a new year. And when the sun rises and you dress for court, you'll make the choice of whether to don the sash or no. You'll choose anew each day. Sleep comes over you in a haze of gold and green. It's time to get back to the house, you suppose, though your heart longs to linger in the lazy mildness of the late afternoon ride. The air is spiced with fresh orange blossoms, and the sun has a hazy golden quality that provides ample warmth and brightness without causing you to squint under its light. It falls over the slopes of the great Iron Age hill fort a way off, turning the grassy slopes into rivers of gold. You're glad you managed to get outside for a little while, if only to refocus your eyes and reset your mind after long hours at work in the low light of the library. There's more to do before you can call the task finished. But you're proud of the progress you've made, and sure you've more than earned a leisurely hour on the grounds of the estate. Winifred, your horse, is happy for the outing as well. She's been itching for a longer ride, and with temperatures warming up, you're both grateful for the fresh air and exercise. You turn back toward the stately country house now, satisfied and ready to return to your project. Earlier this week, you began restoring the modest library of Coventry House, the estate left to you last year by an eccentric uncle. It's been exhausting work, cataloging and reorganizing books, repairing and often entirely rebuilding the shelves, and thoroughly cleaning the corners and crevices. But you're glad you finally set about doing it. Who hasn't dreamt of maintaining a library in their own residence? You look forward to making it a cozy, dreamy place to relax with a book on quiet evenings or rainy days. You dismount and lead Winifred back to the paddock, giving her a hearty scratch on the neck. She nuzzles your hand with affection. As you open the gate for her, you turn your head in the direction of a high-pitched, chattering call from the holly nearby. There's a dark silhouette of a bird atop one of the trees. As Winifred saunters away, you raise a hand over your eyes to see what creature is making such a call. From its dark eyes and stature, you deduce that it's a rather petite falcon with bluish-gray wings and a buffy, streaked breast. A Merlin, if you're not mistaken. You watch it for a moment or two, its tail twitching in the breeze. The Merlin swivels its head and stops, and you could swear it's looking right at you. You hold the falcon's gaze for a little while, till you feel the spiral of breeze, sudden and swift, sweep through your hair. You shiver slightly, breaking the eyeline to pull your arms in tight against the surprising chill. When you glance upward again toward the top of the holly, the Merlin is gone. Winifred seems content in her paddock, and you feel at once quite keen to get back indoors. There was something about the way the Merlin was looking at you. Maybe it's all the work of your imagination, but it seemed to know you, to have a message for you. There was nothing fearful about it, but all the same, it was uncanny. You're not quite sure what to make of it. By the time you're inside, there are still goosebumps running all the way up your arms. Perhaps by now, after nearly a year of residence in the Georgian country house, and more than one curious adventure within or outside the walls, you should be accustomed to whimsical occurrences. But you shake off the encounter with a nonchalant air and make for the library in the heart of Coventry House. Your uncle, whom you only met once in your childhood, remains very much a mystery to you. But through the careful restoration of the residence he bequeathed to you, and the painstaking organization of all the belongings therein, you feel closer to him each day. You've pored over his curious journals, admired his collections of poetry and the works of Shakespeare and Marlowe, and sorted through countless knickknacks and decorative objects. He was the kind of man who kept on the same bookshelf assorted tomes on ancient mathematics and the entire bibliography of Dr. Seuss. You like to think he was a studious person with an exquisite sense of humor, someone who loved to observe the natural world and its curious workings, and who always had a witty remark to slice through the most complex matters of life. Most of today, prior to your brief escape to sun-flooded hills, you've been occupied with erecting a new bookcase to hold some of the oldest books in the library. The musty, tattered tomes were languishing on a piece of furniture so deep in disrepair that it audibly groaned beneath their weight. It must have been a beautiful piece in its time, so it was a pity to dismantle it, but you were able to salvage the charming, decorative tracery from the corners and incorporate them into the new shelves. Finally, lifting the new bookcase onto its base, you find you're quite pleased with the outcome. It needs some shimmying to stand flush against the wall, but there seems to be something snagging it at the bottom. Probably just a shard of wood from the old bookcase, or some other debris wedged against the molding. Crouching down and feeling round the back of the shelf, your hand closes around a small, jagged something made of cool metal. Bringing it out to the light, you reveal that it's a key. Substantially weighted and made of what seems to be cast iron, the key is larger than one you might use today for doors and cupboards. You turn it over in your hands, inspecting its intricate handmade decoration, a familiar-looking symbol with 3 spirals spinning out from a point at the center. You're sure you've seen the symbol before, recently, perhaps even somewhere in the house. It takes some time for the flame of recognition to ignite, but once it does, you leap to your feet without a moment's more hesitation. You make for the banquet hall, which these days is more of a neglected storage space. During the winter, you spent day after day combing through the various curios stacked and scattered in the banquet hall, determining what to keep, what to sell, and what to dispose of. You managed to clear most of the floor and get the room into decent shape, but there's one item within that's had you stumped from the start: a leather-bound chest with a tarnished bronze lock. Swinging wide the banquet hall doors, you stride across the room to the heavy chest, which you pushed to a corner, fearing you'd have to pry it open if you never found the key. But now, your fingers buzzing with an almost electric anticipation, you found it. This must be the key to the mysterious chest, for there, as you kneel before it, is the worn but still recognizable symbol: the 3 interlocked spirals. You can feel your heart beating excitedly in your chest. You do your best to temper expectations. For all you know, the trunk might only contain broken baubles, ugly novelties, or loose confounding papers. But then again, you think, it might contain untold riches, gold, lost treasures, or masterpieces. Go on then, you tell yourself. Try to open it. The iron key slides easily into the lock. There's a rusty squeaking and minor resistance as you turn it, but it does turn. You take a deep breath and heave open the lid of the chest. Before you can even see what's inside, you're overcome with the sudden scent of meadow sweet, a green, earthy freshness that's evocative of spring mornings. It nearly knocks you back into a reverie, but you're determined to investigate the contents of the chest. Peering over the edge, you look inside. Books. More books, of course. You have to steel yourself against the twinge of disappointment. You've seen so many books, donated so many to local booksellers and schools, squeezed hundreds onto the limited shelves in the library, cast so many away due to irreparable damage. What on earth are you going to do with more books? There are some loose scrolls filling the chest too, which you sweep aside to reveal a half dozen or so glass vessels at the bottom. There are a few pieces of rusty-looking jewelry, including a pendant with a quartz-like stone. You remove the glass vessels gingerly, holding them up to the light to inspect their contents. Each contains a mix of dried flowers and herbs, and a few have small stones and crystals in the bottom. They might explain the lingering floral scent. How old might these items be? You imagine that if you uncorked any of the bottles, the botanicals might instantly disintegrate on exposure to the air. The scrolls are delicate, and the books are ancient-looking. You have half a mind to run and find some gloves, but curiosity overwhelms caution. You reach for the largest tome in the chest, bound in greenish leather and tied round with a narrow strip of the same. Carefully retrieving it and examining the cover, you observe the same spiraling symbol in faded gold. Surely there's some significance to this volume. So, you cautiously unravel the twine and lift the cover to reveal the yellowed pages within. The artifact is old, many centuries old. You feel a thrill and a sense of mischief handling it, and a voice within keeps urging you to set it aside until you can bring in a rare book trader to appraise it. But you can't seem to put it down. Something within the pages calls to you, whispers really, as though trying to draw you in. When you find the first instance of writing, however, it's in a language and script you're unequipped to read. Probably some form of Old Welsh, handwritten in a style with over-the-top embellishments. You're about to set it down and look into the other volumes in the chest when you notice a flicker of movement from the pages. It might be a trick of the shifting light through the tall windows of the banquet hall, a cloud passing over the near-setting sun, perhaps. You glance at the windows to confirm, but the light has not significantly changed. Instead, however, your eyes land on the branches of an orange tree in the courtyard, where a barrel-chested bird has just alighted. It's the Merlin again. You blink, almost laughing to see the creature once more. That same uncanny feeling washes over you. The sense that the bird knows something about you. You shake your head and look back to the pages of the manuscript where you expect to find the Old Welsh. But there, before you, the text is transforming, shape-shifting, and straightening. The unintelligible words are changing form, assuming familiar shapes, word by word, and line by line until at last, miraculously, they are legible. The tome has translated itself to the language you most comfortably read and speak. You can't help but gasp. You flip to the inside cover, where the previously obscure handwritten title now reads, The Life and Prophecies of Merlin. Your whole body goes up in goosebumps as your eyes drink in the title over and over. It can't be, can it? Do you hold in your hands the first-hand account of the life and prophetic visions of Merlin, the legendary sorcerer who served King Arthur more than 1,000 years ago? You flip through the pages, all of which are now easily readable in your language. The swift movement of the pages creates an artificial breeze, which tickles your face. But even as you stop on a particular page, looking to concentrate on a line of text, the movement of the air continues, whipping into a vigorous wind, replete with flecks of moisture, like dew or mist. You raise a hand to wipe the moisture from your face, and also to confirm that it's more than an illusion. And there, indeed, between your finger and thumb, are tiny beads of clear water. You raise your eyes from the pages of the tome, seeking the source of the droplets, but you discover an even greater mystery instead. For your surroundings have changed somehow, without your even noticing. No longer do you kneel in the neglected banquet hall of Coventshire House, but on the blustery top of a great grassy mound in the open country. The sky is gray and cloud-crossed, and the air is so thick with heavy mist that it almost feels like rain. You rise to your feet, awestruck and confused, whirling around to take in the surrounding landscape. All around you, for miles and miles, are green plains and slopes, forests beyond. There's no sign of a road or a village nearby, but there are some distinct, clearly man-made grooves in the ground surrounding the raised hill you stand on. It's familiar somehow, though you can't quite place this strange construction. It's only now that you realize you're not alone. How long has the tall figure been standing beside you? Clutching the leather-bound book to your chest, you look up at him. He's finely dressed, his robes embroidered across the breast with the shape of a heraldic dragon. His hair and beard are long, mostly dark gray with streaks of white. In one hand, he clutches a towering staff, carved with intricate symbols and patterns. But behind the finery and imposing stature is a soft expression and warm, crinkly eyes. You feel an instant kinship with him, a sense of total trust and safety that you can't explain. But it's also strange, so overwhelming, that you feel your knees grow weak and you nearly collapse. The stranger's hand reaches out with relaxed confidence to steady you, and where he touches your arm, you feel a resonant heat. "What is this?" you ask. "Where am I?" The stranger's eyes travel to the book you clutch against your chest. He gestures to it plainly. "I see you've found my notes," he says, in a voice that's clear and low. "Your notes?" You scan the stranger's face, noticing now the faint ghost of a symbol painted upon his brow. Though it's faded and difficult to be sure, you think it must be the same triple spiral yet again. Then it's true. You are Merlin, the enchanter? I am he, says Merlin. And what is this place? You ask again, still puzzling over the familiarity of the natural terrain. A simple question, one might think, Merlin responds, though a simple answer will not satisfy. In the most immediate, you are upon Salisbury Plain. But more to the point, you are in a memory, or perhaps a prophecy. How can that be, you ask? I will do my best to explain, says Merlin. But for now, the new king is approaching, and with him his troops and attendants, all expecting to witness a miracle. I must pause our conversation in favor of some showmanship. The king, you say, turning to the west, from whence indeed a company of soldiers approaches. Can it be? Uther, comes Merlin's voice, resounding and sonorous, booming over the hills as though magnified by magic. The troops, close enough now to make out the details of their stoic faces, gather near the base of the mound. Merlin continues, I have promised you a monument worthy of your most noble brother and king, Ambrosius, a monument that should stand forever. That promise I intend to keep. I have also claimed that I will bring forth the very stones of the giants' dance from far to the west. Your men have doubted that I can perform such a task. Let them witness my actions now, so that there can be no more doubt. With a clandestine glance to you, and the whisper of a wink in his sparkling eyes, Merlin raises his staff and his open hand toward the gray sky. The air around him changes subtly, as though every droplet of mist were at once brought to attention, called to become a current, a conduit for his power. There comes a rumbling from the clouds, drum-like and low, but not thunder exactly. The faces of the men below, led by the broad-shouldered Uther, are turned upward in expectation and inquiry. A great cumulus cloud gathers directly over the plain, swelling and darkening as Merlin utters an incantation in an unfamiliar tongue. Then, when it seems the cloud cannot possibly hold any more, it breaks like a dam and releases a tide of rain. The torrent is concentrated over the raised hill, falling all around you, and yet somehow you remain entirely dry, untouched by the cascades of water. You hold out an arm, fascinated to find that the curtains of rain seem repelled by you, jumping out of your way as two like magnetic poles repel each other. You can see Uther's party, safe beyond the limited borders of the sudden storm, gazing with astonishment. And Merlin, beside you, still chants in his rhythmic secret language. And through the rain, here you observe is the miracle, as though the raindrops are freezing, solidifying when they fall to the ground. A silvery mass is forming. Many masses, in fact, like grains of sand falling into place, round and round the base to form a statuesque solid. Stones, the size of elephants, are forming from the rain. Stones standing tall in concentric circles. Of course, you recognize it now. Merlin's word, gesture, and power are writing Stonehenge onto Salisbury Plain. You've only ever seen the renowned monument as a ruin, the sarsen and blue stones oriented to the solstice sun. Impressive as it is in aged form, with missing stones and fallen ones, now it takes shape as a stunning, complete temple. As the lintels form atop the standing stones, connecting them like bridges, the rain slowly dissipates and evaporates. The atmosphere typical of the moments after a sudden and brief downpour is silvery and cool. The whole of the plain glows with a kind of pale luminescence. Then the clouds break overhead, and in streams golden sunlight, which catches the drops of moisture still suspended in the air. At once, it's like 1,000 tiny rainbows burst about, bouncing off of one another and playing across the stones. Stonehenge, in its glorious fullness, absorbs the rays of sun and gleams. In the infinitesimal and yet yawningly wide space of a moment between the stopping of the rain and the uproar of Uther's company, you can feel a vibration in the earth beneath your feet. And a sound is present in the air, you're sure of it. Though it's so much like silence, it's hard to describe. Like a quivering hum that originates at the center of the stones, or where the sunlight meets the stones and reverberates in the spaces between them. To your ears, it is the sweetest sound, like sacred, healing music. But in an instant, it's drowned by the voices of Uther and his men, exclaiming praise for the enchanter Merlin, whose power they shall never doubt again. Now they are climbing the monument, encircling and admiring the stones. You turn to Merlin, who looks pleased, if a bit drained, hoping he'll tell you more about your peculiar position. But Uther is approaching, and the sorcerer's eyes are upon him alone. Curiously, neither Uther nor his men pay you or your modern dress any mind. In fact, it seems they have not noticed your presence at all. Your close proximity to Merlin and the seeming fact that you are imperceptible to the others on Salisbury Plain means you are privy to the low-voiced conversation that commences between the two. "It is a worthy monument to him, my friend," says Uther. Behind the confidence and clarity in his voice, you detect a swell of sadness, such as one who has known a great loss. And to all those lost in this great battle, how is it that you conjured these stones from the giant's ring? "Never mind that," Merlin responds warmly. There's no poetry in the practical details. Only relish the magic for what it is and what it serves. He was a good king, your brother Ambrosius. You'll need to be strong and faithful to succeed him well. Uther lifts his eyes to Merlin, and the grief there melts to something like insecurity, then deep resolve. I will, he says, and henceforth I shall strive for peace, with this monument to remind us of the price of war. Merlin smiles. There's something of the calm wisdom of a teacher in his words and manner toward Uther. Very well, he says. You shall be crowned forthwith and take the style your brother once adopted of Pendragon. Merlin places a hand on Uther's shoulder. The king softens at the touch. It is a pity, Merlin says, that he means so well and will fall so much into the shadows of history. And even more the pity that this very site, a memorial to his brother, will be the grave of his own son. You're taken aback by Merlin's words, but Uther's face does not change, as if he hasn't heard them. You realize presently that the words were only spoken to you. Uther returns to his men, and you are alone again with the enchanter. How can you know that, you ask? How can you know his future? Merlin's eyes shine with the weight of unasked for wisdom. This is the great gift and great curse with which I have been endowed, he says. History, memory, prophecy, these are not distinct, but interlocked. Time is not a straight line. All things are happening all at once, all around us and beyond us. Most cannot see, but those of us who can bear a great burden and can access great wisdom. Faintly, you can still hear the humming of the stone or the earth beneath them, the deep vibrations and echoes of the earth. Walk with me, says Merlin. I can show you more if you like. Nodding vigorously, pursued by a flood of curiosity, you leap to follow Merlin as he strides away from the immaculate Stonehenge. As you move, the rolling grasses of Salisbury Plain dissolve, and the blustery winds calm. You step, for a brief moment, into complete darkness, as though moving through a blank void, and then new surroundings materialize. You stand before a castle, or at least the makings of one, atop a very steep hill. Stone upon stone suggest tower and rampart, but the whole thing appears at once under construction and in utter ruin. A company of dejected laborers look on in despair as their work crumbles. You turn to ask Merlin what it is you're looking at, but instead of the tall, finely robed sorcerer, you find you are accompanied by a mere child of no more than 10. He graces you with a moment's eye contact, during which you recognize the same puckish, sparkling eyes, albeit younger by far. Then the child turns to another figure looking on, a richly dressed nobleman. No, you think, observing the crown upon his head, a king. But he is nothing like Uther. The king addresses the child Merlin as though speaking to a courtier. My counselors tell me that you possess the sight, my boy. If this is so, what can you tell me of this calamity that plagues my efforts? Have I not the finest engineers and architects in the mighty isle? Why is it that every stone I lay in the building of this castle falls to the ground? The boy Merlin ponders the question, then crouches down, pressing a hand to the soil. He stays there for some time. You can see doubt and dismissal brewing on the king's face. But after a while, Merlin lets go a sound of amused recognition, as if stumbling upon an unexpected, yet perfectly reasonable truth. Would you like to see what's causing your troubles, your grace? Says Merlin, in a voice that's childlike but wise beyond his years. The king is taken aback, but he nods intently. Merlin's breathing grows heavy, both hands still pressed to the ground. Then, slowly, he rises, fingers taut, pulling something up from the soil, as if he has marionette strings tied to each of his fingers. And on the ends of the strings are two figures made of shining light, two miniature dragons, one red, one white, writhing and snarling and snorting at one another. The king recoils. What is this? He says. My lord, says Merlin, without a hint of fear or discomfort. These are only reflections, exhumations of the true conflict that stymies your efforts. You see, beneath this castle lies a lake, and in that lake are two dragons, very like these, whose constant fighting causes your castle to collapse. The more you try to build it, the faster it will fall, until you can bring peace to the warring dragons in the deep. You look closely at the two dragons of light, hung by shining threads from Merlin's fingers, like gossamer. You marvel at the detail in the conjuration, and you try to feel the rumbling in the earth of the two life-sized creatures below your feet, waging their full war. By what means, Merlin continues, did you choose to build your fortress on this spot, your grace? The king indicates that he was counseled by his wisest advisors, two of whom step forward, looking down their noses at the boy. I will now unfold to you the meaning of this mystery, Merlin says. The pool is the emblem of this world. The red serpent is your dragon, but the white serpent is the dragon of the people who occupy this isle from sea to sea. At length, however, our people shall rise and drive away the invaders whence they came. But you must depart from this place, where you are not permitted to erect a citadel. I, to whom fate has allotted this mansion, shall remain here, whilst to you it is incumbent to seek other provinces, where you may build a fortress. And with these final words, the child Merlin, with a flourish of his hands to release the light illusion of the dragons, moves away from the king and his flummoxed advisors, who immediately begin to argue amongst themselves. He removes a stone from the crumbling foundation of the castle and departs. You follow Merlin with a leap in your step, amazed by the young boy's defiance. Are there really dragons beneath our feet? You ask, nearly running to keep up as the child strides across the hill. Before you, his shape is changing. He is growing taller. Long robes begin to flow from his arms, and his hair lengthens and grays and turns white. The sky darkens at the same pace, and night falls around you. You catch up with Merlin, now aged many decades, but still possessing the foundation stone, standing just before the hill meets its steep slope. It is a mild night, and the moon is only a faint curve among a bright multitude of stars. The enchanter is gazing, wild-eyed, toward the heavens. There's just enough visibility to observe the bend and shape of the landscape before you, forest and dale. Even in the low light, it's strikingly familiar. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recognize it as the country you now call home, as yet untouched by much development or age. Look there, says Merlin, gesturing toward a point in the sky. Your gaze follows until it lights on a very bright object well above the horizon, with a hazy tail of luminescence. What do you see? Asks the sorcerer. A comet, isn't it? You reply. But as you continue to gaze on the phenomenon, it seems to expand, shift, and thrash in the sky. The tail is like fire. No, a dragon, you say, rapt with wonder. This beast is always with me, Merlin says. In the pool beneath the castle, in the sky over Uther's war, and in the eyes of Uther's son. It reminds me of the cause I serve, and all the blinding potential of kings, potential so often unmet. What about King Arthur? You interject. Will we see him? All my memories are of Arthur, utters Merlin, and all my prophecies too, even those in which he is unseen. He is present like a shadow. Come. You follow Merlin again into the void and emerge in a new place. Vaguely from the mountainous terrain and the distant lake, you identify this as the Scottish Highlands. It's afternoon, and a reddish sun reflects, glittering over the water. Below you is a wild forest, so vast you cannot see where it ends, even from your elevated vantage point. Here, Merlin lays down the stone from the fallen castle in a flat place upon the grass. As it hits the earth, you can almost see the silhouette of a great fortress, cast like a mirage or an after-image around it. You can hear the whizzing hum again, and atop it the voices of children at play. At the same time, on a lower frequency, you can detect the orotund sound of chanting. It's faint, but sounds distinctly ancient, magical. What is this place? You inquire. This is a site of great and ancient magic, Merlin responds. The very earth and waters here are infused with it. Since the dawn of time, it has called to those who wish to study sorcery. My own magic is insignificant to that of the lands. The stone I have just laid is the first brick of a school I will build, have built, in this place. As the stones of the giant dance were placed precisely to channel the power of the sun, so shall this castle be raised to absorb and magnify the magic of this land. I can see it, you say. The castle, the school. Before you, the indistinct vision of the fortress flickers in and out of shape. And I can hear the voices of those who walked the land before us, and those who are to come. These last words form independently of thought, but you know them to be true. You can feel yourself standing on the precipice of time, observing past, present, and future. Then you are beginning to understand. Merlin smiles. I've waited some time for someone who could, as those in your time are fond of saying, read between the lines. As he says this, while you contemplate the flickering matrix of time and space you find yourself at the center of, you can also feel the book in your hands. You can feel your knees folded against the hard floor of the banquet hall at Coventshire House, even as you also stand tall in the Highlands. You feel yourself as an axis, a center point from which many things originate, from which time, space, and magic unfurl in spinning spirals. With this new sensation of grounded expansion, you move through Merlin's world, unencumbered. You find you can glide upon the spirals, like dew along a spider web, until you find yourself in a magnificent hall. At its center is a table, round and smooth, laden with place settings and urns of fresh flowers. It's fit for 100 guests or more, and as many seem to be pouring in from the entrance hall. One of them, attended by a cupbearer and counselors, is crowned and dons fine regalia. His smile shines in the fullness of youth, but there is a wisdom and a heaviness behind his eyes. You seek out Merlin in the vision. He accompanies the young king. Is this him then, you ask? Is this King Arthur? This is he, Merlin replies, who is called Rex Quondam Rex Futurus, the once and future king. You follow Merlin and the king to their places at the round table, watching the faces of other knights and courtiers who take seats there. On them you recognize deep affection and admiration for Arthur. Your heart softens toward him too, so noble and so burdened. As in all the other visions you've received, no one but Merlin acknowledges your presence, so you move freely round the table, picking up conversations and gestures unseen. The queen, Guinevere, is seated by her husband, but now and then you catch a furtive glance between her and one of the honored knights. You know this to be Lancelot. Another knight bears a curious green sash round the waist. You hear whispers of a newcomer to court, a harper called Tristan, who hails from Cornwall. But a kind of magnetism draws you back to Arthur. His face transforms as you observe him, from youth to old age and back again. You can see him all at once as the unassuming boy who pulled a sword from a stone, the noble leader and warrior of his people, and the king beneath the mountain, waiting to be reborn. When you behold Merlin the same, you see the strange child with second sight, the powerful sorcerer who raised Stonehenge, and the specter of a forgotten way of life. Somehow, as you've walked through Merlin's memories and prophecies, he's imparted to you some of his gifts. Pushing yourself along the spirals of time, you pass through the whole life of the enchanter Merlin in an order that seems random at first, but reveals itself to be quite deliberately designed. You move from the feast at Arthur's court to an empty hall in which Merlin is at work constructing the round table for Uther Pendragon. From here you step into the lands of Cornwall, where a love-struck Uther begs Merlin to help him woo the Lady Igraine, the future mother of Arthur, by magic. Then you find yourself once more in the Highlands, where Merlin trains an apprentice at the burgeoning school of sorcery. She's a beautiful lady with much apparent potential for magical power. At last you slide along the spiral to a peaceful, twilight grove of oak trees. The figure of Merlin is nowhere to be seen in this vision, but in the subtle vibrations of the air, you can sense his presence all around you. The stateliest oak, with a girth as wide as a small house, resonates most purely, seeming to emit a golden glow and ringing hum. A flicker of movement pulls your eyes upward to one of the tree's low branches. A petite falcon, your Merlin, perches there, bobbing its tail. Then it flies away, over the trees and out of sight. You stand for some time between the trees, breathing in the earthy scent of the grove and listening to the echo of wildlife in the forest beyond. With each breath, you gather up some of the energy that reverberates through the grove. Then you feel yourself drawn back along the spiral, through the highlands and the banquet hall, over Salisbury Plain and the crumbling castle, and at last to rest upon the familiar hill where you and Merlin watch the flame-tailed dragon comet in the sky. You don't need to speak. An unbreakable tether has formed between you and the enchanter of legend. You've seen his whole life and stepped into the source and workings of his magic. You can feel it buzzing in your body, warm and exciting. But you've learned, too, of the solemn duties that accompany such power. Merlin is not only sorcerer, prophet, but threshold bearer, mentor, advisor. His own ambition and limitless potential are secondary to service, to the Pendragon. This realization prompts a well of affection and sympathy for Merlin. What great restraint and selflessness is necessary to turn one's own gifts toward the flourishing of another, and to do so in full knowledge of Arthur's looming fate, of his own fate. This strikes you as altogether extraordinary, more extraordinary even than sorcery. But then you think of the people in your life who bore you across thresholds and rites of passage, the caregivers, teachers, and mentors who dedicated their time and gifts to shaping your upbringing. Each of them was a Merlin. Now you too can access such wisdom. It's up to you to decide how you'll use it. From your lookout at the top of Merlin's Hill, you and the enchanter watch as the stars move across the sky, as the sun rises and falls 1,000 times, and castles are built and destroyed. All of time is happening at once, all around you. Only you stand still at the center of all things. When the moment calls for it, you close your eyes, feeling yourself slide downward as though collapsing in on yourself. Your body finds a kind of comforting stillness, a solid foundation beneath your folded knees. Before you open your eyes, you feel the weight of the open book in your hands, and you know you are back in the banquet hall of Coventshire House. It's the last glimmering gasp of afternoon. Rosy rays of sun stream through the tall windows and dance across the floor. You think of the way the sun passes beneath the lintels on Salisbury Plain, turning the monument to a ring of shadowy and illuminated portals. There is a firm yet comforting weight upon your shoulder, like the reassuring squeeze of a caregiver's hand. It is Merlin's hand. Yet when you turn toward him, you find that you are alone. Well, not entirely alone. Outside the windows, in the fading light, the Merlin falcon still watches you, inquisitive and charming. You run a hand along the pages of the book. The words have returned to their original language, but somehow you no longer find it strange. In fact, the words jump right off the page with complex, layered meanings that seem entirely organic to you. On the open page, you find Merlin musing on his future. He knows with absolute certainty that he will be imprisoned in an ancient oak tree by the woman he loves, using the enchantment that he himself taught to her. And yet he describes this fate not with grief, but acceptance and curiosity. He writes as though it will happen in some distant future, and as if it has already happened. As if he is there now, and he accesses some universal wisdom through the branches and the root systems of his ancient oak. You can feel warmth vitality, and resignation radiating from the pages. At length, you close the leather-bound tome and tie it once more with the tassel, safely locking it once more within its chest. You string the key along the quartz pendant, hang it round your neck, and tuck it under your garments. Exiting through the banquet hall's French doors, you relish the breezy onset of evening and the fragrance of the orange grove. You find Winifred grazing, and with a gentle voice, you ask if she'd fancy an evening ride. She seems to understand because she responds with a playful snort and a nuzzle. You feel unquenchably drawn toward the most imposing feature of the local landscape, the great hill fort just to the north. You don't need to climb it, not tonight, just to get close, to be in its shadow. When you reach the base, the sun has just begun its lazy descent beyond the mountains. Dazzling pink and orange exhale across the sky. You bring Winifred to a halt, but the grasses and leaves of the landscape continue to bend forward with the wind, as if in response to your stillness. You look up toward the top of the hill, a vestige of the Iron Age, about which much legend and speculation swirls, to spot the ruins of a keep and stone ramparts. But the longer you look, the more you see. An illusory structure is superimposed on the ruins. It flickers in and out of view like spectral frames. A grand fortress, then a crumbling one. A stately castle, then a ruin overtaken by dueling dragons. The whole countryside rolling out beneath the hill comes alive with the sound and vibration of the past, present, and future. You can see it all, hear it all, feel it all in your bones. Merlin was here, is here, will always be here. You try to glimpse him atop the hill, wondering if some echo of the sorcerer still stands there, watching a serpentine comet spin across the sky. At last, you turn back, observing the burgeoning darkness that climbs the eastern slopes. A hum of crickets underscores your ride home as you and Winifred move against the evening breeze. You have a sense of great peace and kindled elation, the feeling of having been let on to a wonderful secret. Such has been the nature of your first year dwelling at Coventshire House and in this magically charged part of the country. It is a place of many secrets, wonders, and doorways. The spiral key, a comforting weight around your neck, feels warm against your chest. What other secrets might it unlock as you travel down the path of Merlin? The country house is quiet in the dell. On your approach, You imagine its doors and windows shining, opening onto secret histories everywhere. You think of the uncle who left you the estate, whose eyes sparkled so like the legendary sorcerers. You think of how you are the sum total of all who came before you, all who ushered you across threshold after threshold, all who taught and advised you, how their histories run through your veins, infusing your present and informing the future you create. How one day you'll pass on everything you've learned, and in that way you'll be immortal, shining like a legend or a star.